Above, there is a video that goes to show sometimes the quality of humanity even in the middle of a conflict. During World War II, there was a German fighter that was going to shoot down an American bomber. But when they got closer and lined up the crosshairs, they saw just how heavily damaged that the bomber was. The bomber had suffered damage and was also losing engine power, and therefore it had to fly low and slow. The German pilot, feeling that pull in his heart to show humanity and kindness, did not pull his trigger, and in fact protected the American bomber out of German occupied airspace by escorting it and making sure that the plane was able to get back to Allied lines as quickly as possible. Once they got to the edge of German space, the pilot and the individuals parted ways. About 50 years later, they became friends again. They were able to receive letters from each other and saw reports of the stories, and they became friends and stayed friends until they all passed on, I believe in the early 2000s or late 90s. But it's a really cool story and a testament just to show how humanity comes forward. There is a time that was never spoken by outside of the only witness and the crew of a heavily damaged German bomber, a Heinkel HE-177 Grief. The NightStalker, when going on its attack runs, found a lone bomber during World War II in a situation very much like this. Saw a heavily damaged German bomber. It had recently knocked out a large swath of enemy bombers, only 30 minutes before using its powerful hyperjet engines to speed to its new target. The crew on the plane had suffered severe wounds to most of the crew, and the only person who could fly the plane had lost an eye, so he was flying half-blind. This was a perfect opportunity for the NightStalker to spread forth its reign of terror and the battlefield, and just to show how cruel and evil it could be to its enemies. But something inside seemed to click on the inside of this insidious beast. When the NightStalker looked inside with its glowing left eye, it could see the deathly wounded individuals lying on the ground inside as one healthy individual tended to the others the best they could, while putting out small fires and trying to replace broken wires and pipes to keep the plane going. A few rows of angry eyes aimed at the body of the bomber as the NightStalker had his explosive rounds prepared to fire. It was only a few feet from the side of the bomber, so it could see in easily. A large hole had been torn in the fuselage of the Heinkel, reducing its speed and structural integrity, leading to the plane having to fly low and slow to avoid breaking apart. You could see what looked like makeshift supports in the plane, barely holding its plane together. A panicked crew inside prayed for all they're worth as the body of the plane flexed, threatening to doom all of its crew to a fiery death. For some odd reason, the NightStalker handled this situation similar to the German pilot in this story up above. The terrifying beast did not fire its explosive charges to kill the bomber. In fact, it used a special launcher that had already expelled its payload, and it manually reloaded it with a special tool that it used to heal itself or others in battle. A strange steel belt net adapter network was slowly loaded into its eyes as the other eyes moved around its body to make room for it. The men on the plane were terrified, not knowing what the NightStalker was doing. They could only see many eyes staring at them out of the windows and through the huge hole in the fuselage. After a minute or so, 10 rounds could be heard going off as little grappling heads stuck to the edge of the bomber around where the hole was. The NightStalker proceeded to slowly orbit the bomber, making sure to place its steel belt network very carefully around the body of the plane without knocking the plane apart. The NightStalker had to be extremely careful or else the enemy bomber would break up. The NightStalker strategically placed 10 charges around the hole in the aircraft as what looked like a tension unit on board. The NightStalker started to tighten the bands of steel. A few minutes later, of placing more of those cinch charges around the body of the plane, the NightStalker then started manually tightening the belts in between the spiderweb network of steel belts. Over the course of a tense 20 minutes, the obsidian beast slowly and ever so carefully greatly increased the structural integrity of the Heinkel HE-177 Greif. As the crew on board looked in shock, seeing cracks and breaks in the body slowly seemed to seal up. The NightStalker proceeded to use a specialized plasma torch to burn the cracks shut using those steel belts, eventually covering up most of the damage as if it had never happened. It then proceeded to put a spiderweb network of steel cables around the hole to make sure no person could get sucked out of the plane. After an additional 10 minutes, the NightStalker proceeded to then surgically repair one of the broken engines of the bomber, as the other one was starting to overheat. After a few minutes, the engines roared to life, and control was returned to the pilot. After doing a few more touch-ups to assure the plane's stability and integrity, the NightStalker proceeded to use a hook on its underbelly to grab onto the net and lift the body of the bomber higher in altitude so the pilots could clear the upcoming mountain range. At this time, the NightStalker proceeded to open a hatch in its body that looked like it led into the guts of an alien beast. A strange cable-like tentacle produced a large medical kit with all the supplies needed to handle the various ailments of the crew. After receiving it, the crew waved at the NightStalker, letting them know that they had it. The tentacle then receded back into the body of the craft, and the hatch sealed itself up as if it had never existed. This was an advanced Arsenal X trauma kit that would ensure the safety of anyone who was treated with it. As the NightStalker flew with the craft, it walked the crew through the process of using the advanced equipment and the medical kit to heal and fix themselves to an acceptable level. It took a few hours of careful work and intervention by various tentacles from the beast, but the crew was eventually patched up and they were put into stable condition. Cheers could be heard emanating from the body of the aircraft as the pilot and his crew were cheering, thanking their mysterious benefactor for his kindness. Once the bomber had cleared the range and was assured that the enemy bomber could fly back home to Germany, unaffected and unopposed, the NightStalker broke off its attachment to the bomber, and the plane fell from its altitude back over to the ground slowly and surely. The pilots on board at this time cheered at the beast as it was repairing their plane, and they sang songs of thanks in German, thanking their mysterious friend. The NightStalker did a barrel roll around the Heinkel HE-177 Greif before breaking off its trajectory and returning back to finish its mission. The NightStalker waved its wings back and forth as a final farewell and snapshotted a picture of the smiling and waving crew before going away. The German bomber made its way back home safe and sound, suffering no further damage except a belly landing due to a faulty landing gear. All the crew survived and made fairly full recoveries. The NightStalker put the photograph in its special little sanctum so that way it could remember his friends that he made when helping out the bomber. About 30 years later, the bomber crew was on a flight together as they were going to a conference to discuss new advancements in the German military. They were flying on a private airplane to help ease their travel. Suddenly, a black beast appeared out of nowhere in the air and flew alongside the plane just like it had 30 years ago to the bomber. The crew of the plane were initially terrified because they had never seen such a terrifying beast like this before, and this caused the veterans on board to be worried as well. But after they looked out the window to see what it was, flashbacks to the bomber ran through all of their minds as they realized that this was the mysterious friend that had helped them out previously so long ago. The NightStalker proceeded to do a barrel roll around the body of the private plane and then returned its original position, waving its wings back and forth. The veterans on board started cheering as they realized that this was their friend that came to say hi. All of them had kept small photographs on the wall secretly over these 30 years that they had caught of the plane as a reminder of the second chance at life they had gotten. They then put their wallets up to the window, showing the NightStalker that they still remembered and had their pictures. The eyes of the beast started showing a brilliance of multiple colors, as this seemed to please the NightStalker. A radio was brought over to the veterans as they talked with the NightStalker, telling him how they had been the last 30 years and what they had been up to. The NightStalker didn't say much, but conveyed most of what it needed to by various body behaviors and sounds. This pleased the veterans aboard the plane, and they were very happy to see their friend. Unfortunately, after a few hours of talking, the NightStalker knew that it had to break off, knowing that the visual sight of it from anyone else outside of the plane would cause havoc and a breach of security. So, after a farewell and a few rotations to give a little bit more time, the NightStalker broke off after saying a farewell to its friends. About 30 years later, after keeping in contact here and there throughout the years secretly and over secret communications, the NightStalker would secretly visit its friends in the various places that they lived or through various activities that they would do. In fact, the pilots so dearly wanted to be with a friend that they would actually get their own pilot's licenses renewed every once in a while so that way they could take their own planes to fly with the NightStalker. One of the most famous pictures in the scrapbook of the NightStalker is him flying in formation with his dear friends. You can see the smiles on the pilots' faces as they fly in formation with their dear friend in the clouds and through the sky. They flew hundreds of flights together over the years, with not many physical words being said, but emotions that could write an entire novel series being shown. A special friendship between a beast made for death and destruction and a few old-time veterans. It wanted to wish them well and hoped that they were doing well in the final years of life of the individuals as they slowly grew older and older. As a final act of kindness, before they were brought to the arms of the great creator, the NightStalker would secretly take the veterans one at a time on a personal flight with them inside of the cockpit. The NightStalker would fly its friends around, showing them something that only a very few people in all of history could ever see, a look inside the beast from the beast out to the rest of the world. But to the pilots, this was their friend and their companion. It was said that at the funerals of the veterans, the NightStalker hovered overhead, hidden using advanced stealth technology to keep itself from being detected. It always made sure that the funerals and services were scheduled during a light rain. The reason why is because with all of its eyes, they would drip what would look like tears, showing its sadness for the loss of its friends. A very rare sight of the NightStalker, a terrifying beast of destruction. Once the last veteran had sadly passed on to eternity, the NightStalker shed its last tears before slowly flying back to its home, silently and solemnly. All of its lights turned off. Its engines ran cold and with a very faint red. To this day, inside of the cockpit and on the body of the aircraft when it is not in battle mode, it has sigils created by the pilots individually that it had stamped on itself to show respect and care for its friends that it made. The NightStalker from first contact to last tear shed was completely autonomous and pilotless, showing just how capable and sentient this beast really was. Yes, every contact that the NightStalker had with these individuals was without it having a pilot, completely autonomous. Arsenal X would later stumble across these records by mistake when gathering footage from a recent battle, finding an ancient and secret file archive. These files resurfaced around 2021 mid-year. This shook the highest levels of Arsenal X to the core as they realized just how incredible and early the NightStalker truly was. They did, however, put these files under lock and key and made sure that they would never ever be able to be accessed by anyone unless the NightStalker itself gave permission. They knew that this meant very much to the NightStalker and that they stumbled across it by accident. These many terabytes of data just go to show just how incredible the relationship between the NightStalker and the crew of that Heinkel HE-177 graph really was. And the fact that the NightStalker did all of this without ever having a pilot continues to baffle even the most incredible minds of Arsenal X to this day. Because of this, a newfound respect was shown of the NightStalker and just how incredible of a creature it truly is.